what's up? It's Shannon the Johnny from the Trinisphere, where Timmy, Johnny, and Spike battle over all things EDH. Today I'm going to take a budget Johnny look at Winota joining her forces, and I'm calling this Winota's Breath of Fury. Now, as a Johnny, I'll be taking a look at underrated and underutilized cards and seeing if Winota can elevate them to the usable status so we can impress our play group with unique deck design. If you're more interested in big beat, non-infinite, powerful plays like a Timmy, or perhaps you play more efficient competitive decks like a Spike, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notifications when my co-hosts make deck techs based around the new Ikoria legendaries themselves. Winota joining her forces is a 4-mana 4/4 legendary human warrior that says whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, with the top 6 cards of your library and put a human from among them into play tapped and attacking. That human gains indestructible until end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. It's pretty awesome. It's like every non-human that you attack with brings its own indestructible human pet to the battle along with it. This brings up a deck building dilemma. How many non-humans should I run? How many humans should I run? As a Timmy, I'd probably look at the best attackers like a Tali and Ilhart and some of the coolest humans that I want to cheat into play. As a Spike, I might look for the most efficient combo that Winota could support, like maybe Bomberman. But as a Johnny, we're going to take a look at underutilized cards and see if Winota can push them to the status where people are impressed. And for that, we're going to look no further than the card Breath of Fury, for which our deck gets its namesake. Breath of Fury is a 4-mana aura that says enchanted creature we control. When the enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it and attach Breath of Fury to another creature we control. If we do untap all of our creatures, and after this phase, there's an additional combat step. So you can see the economy of Breath of Fury, or the balancing factor, is it gives us an additional attack step, but we lose a creature every time we do it. So eventually we would run out of creatures. However, the antithesis to this, or the yin to this yang, Winota gives us creatures every time we attack. The two balance each other out, so they work very well together in an almost infinite fashion. To facilitate this, we're going to use cards like Aura Touch Mage and Heliod's Pilgrim to go get Breath of Fury. Aura Touch Mage is a 6-mana 3/3 human that says when I ATB, go search for an aura and put it into play attached to me. So of course, Aura Touch Mage ensures that we have Breath of Fury in play. So if we hit Aura Touch Mage off of Winota, we pretty much have a good chance of winning the game right then and there. We go get Breath of Fury, creating the Aura Touch Breath of Fury Mage, and if that creature, tapped and attacking and indestructible, manages to deal damage to an opponent, then we're off to the races, and the game may end this turn. Heliod's Pilgrim is a slower approach to doing this. This 3-mana creature says whenever I enter the battlefield, you can search for an aura and put it in your hand. So you can go search for Breath of Fury and then cast Breath of Fury. I tend to not want to do this because this deck wants to keep its mana open to protect our integral pieces, so this is a much more risky approach, but it's there as a secondary plan. So the main way we want to win in this deck is we want to use instant speed non-human generating spells. We want to do this at our opponent's turn so that we have all our mana untapped on our turn. When we untap, we want to use some of our mana to cast Winota, and then we want to go to combat and swing all those non-humans who don't have summoning sickness because we created them on somebody else's turn. Ideally, these will trigger revealing tons and tons and tons of cards and finding Aura Touch Mage. When it does, we'll put Aura Touch Mage into play, go get our Breath of Fury attached to Aura Touch Mage, and if that Aura Touch Mage manages to hit somebody, then we get a new attack step, and we can repeat this process ad nauseum. So some of the cards we're going to use to create our non-human attackers at instant speed include Entrapment Maneuvers, Secure the Wastes, and White Sun Zenith. All of these are instant speed, all of them create X11s. Most of them are based on the mana that we put into them, so we're going to have a pretty decently sized ramp package in this deck. But Entrapment Maneuver is contingent upon the toughness of an attacking creature. So we can use this, and it might piss some people off that we're going to use it just because somebody's attacking somebody else that's not us, and we just want a lot of 1/1 non-human attackers. Our secondary strategy includes some non-human attackers in the form of Bogardin Dragonheart, Loyal Apprentice, Martial Coup, and Smuggler's Copter. Bogardin Dragonheart is a pretty interesting card. This 3-mana 2/2 human has an activated ability to sacrifice another creature to turn it into a 4/4 flying hasting dragon. So it kind of is the best of both worlds. It's a human, so it can be found through Winota's triggered ability, and it can turn itself into a non-human, a dragon, so that it can trigger Winota on the next time it attacks. So it's a pretty interesting card for this deck, and I'm glad it's finding a place in EDH. Little Apprentice is a really good card in this deck. This 2-mana 2/1 hasting human gives us a 1/1 flying hasting Thopter at the beginning of each combat. And in a deck that's based around making as many combats in a single turn as possible, this gets out of hand really fast. Every time we go to combat, we get a new non-human hasting attacker. So this card is absolutely great, and of course it can be found through Winota's triggered ability. Martial Coup is a classic token board wipe. For 7 mana, we can create 5 1/1s after destroying all other creatures. That's a normal use case for Martial Coup, but in this deck, I have used it for X less than 5 before, because we've just ramped out so fast and there's nothing really on the board worth blowing up. We can just cast it for X equals 4 and then go off with Winota, because Winota can go off at as few as 2 non-human creatures, maybe even 1 if you're really lucky. But more often than not, you're going to use Martial Coup to blow up all creatures on the battlefield and leave yourself with 5 5/11s. Most opponents are going to look at those 5/11s and say, oh, well, you know, that's not that big of a deal. I'm going to spend this turn rebuilding my board state. But unbeknownst to them, you just left yourself in the winning configuration. You have 5 non-human attackers in play, and when you untap, all you need to do is cast Winota and swing. Hopefully they tapped out most of their mana in order to rebuild their board state in the hopes of making blocks, which aren't going to matter in a short minute. Additionally, we have Smuggler's Copter, which is really great at turning humans into non-human attackers. This 2-mana 3/3 flying vehicle, when it attacks or blocks, allows us to draw a card and discard a card, and it crews for 1. So of course we can use our humans to crew the Smuggler's Copter, making them into non-human attackers. And then finally we have Tempt with Vengeance. For X and a red, we can create X 1/1 red elemental tokens with haste. And this gives our opponents the ability to copy this spell so they get their X 1/1s as well. But every time they do so, we double the number of the 1/1s we have. And like I said before, a good amount of this deck is going to be about circumventing blockers. So no matter if they do or do not take this equation, it's going to end up in them losing. So speaking of which, for our evasion category, we have cards that help us get through blockers because of course, Aura Touch Breath of Fury Mage needs to make contact with an opponent's life total in order to trigger. So we're going to use cards like Archetype of Aggression to give our creatures trample, Court Street Denizen to tap down blockers, Fervent Cathar to make creatures unable to block, and Fire Mantle Mage to give all of our creatures menace. Lastly, we're going to use Frenzied Goblin as a 1-mana 1/1 goblin that when it attacks, we may pay red, and if we do so, target creature can't block this turn. So a little bit different than Fervent Cathar, which triggers when it enters the battlefield. Frenzied Goblin triggers every time we attack, which is, you know, a theme for this deck. There's many things as we can trigger every time we attack because we plan on attacking multiple times in a single turn. And of course, this is an early game non-human creature, so it can contribute to the Winota triggers. In addition to evasion, we're going to have overrun effects that increase our damage output. So instead of just chonking 20 or 30 life off of a player, we start killing them outright, and then when we start taking extra combat steps, we start killing multiple players and or the whole pod. For that, we have things like Banalish Marshal, which is a glorious anthem on a body, just increasing our power and toughness of our creatures by 1. Bruce Tarl Boorish Herder, an ally that when it enters or attacks, gives target creature double strike or lifelink, so very good in this deck. We have Fireflux Squad, the new 4-mana 4/3 haster. Whenever it attacks, we may exile another attacking creature, and then Polymorph. Reveal cards on top of our deck until we find another creature and put that into play tapped and attacking. So it transforms some of our weaker attackers into potentially better attackers or new ETB triggers. We're also going to run Gold Knight Commander, the 4-mana 2/2 human cleric soldier that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, creatures we control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This card is very powerful in this deck. Surprisingly so, I think when people look at it, they probably are going to underestimate it. And that's because Winota can consistently put X new bodies onto the battlefield every time we attack, where X is the number of non-human attackers. So if we can trigger Winota 3 or 4 times a turn, which is low, we can do much better than that, but we're being conservative here, then Gold Knight Commander is consistently giving +3 or +4 to every creature in play, and that's per attack. So if we attack again, now we're doubling that, +6 to +8 to all of our creatures. If you couple that with Double Strike or Menace on those creatures, the players are going to be dying very quickly in surprising fashion. Speaking of Double Strike, we're also going to run Resolute Blade Master, the 5-mana 2/2 human soldier ally that has Rally, so it triggers when it or another ally enters the battlefield, and it gives all of our creatures Double Strike. So this is just going to absolutely increase our damage output to insane numbers and result in players dying very quickly and or the entire pod dying when we start to attack. This especially gets bananas with extra attack steps. Speaking of which, we have other extra attack step cards, including Chance for Glory, Combat Celebrant, Final Fortune, and Fury of the Horde. I love Chance for Glory. I love Chancing Glory. This is a pet card of mine. This 3-mana instant says creatures you control are indestructible. You take an extra turn after this one, and at the beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. So it has a severe downside, but I love Tempting Fate. I love Chancing Glory. So something as simple as an extra attack step can be the difference between Aura Touch Mage getting through or not. For example, if they have a blocker and we can't get through, we punch into it and they block, thinking that they've somehow avoided disaster. And then we use Chance for Glory to say, oh, you know what, let me try again. And now you have no blocker because you just lost it. I'm going to take another turn. Additionally, we can use this as protection. When somebody tries to board wipe our board state, we can say, you know what, no, I'm going to give my board state indestructible, and then I'm going to take the next turn, and I'm going to kill all the players in the turn order after you so that it's my turn next again. And then I'll pay you back for that whole board wipe scenario. Combat Celebrant needs no introduction. It's a bit of a nombo in this deck because when it comes into play tapped and attacking, it does not have the opportunity to exert itself. So generally speaking, it's just a 4/1 human that attacks. But if we start with it in play on our turn, or it has haste when we're taking our extra combat steps, then we can of course use this to get an additional combat sprinkled in there. Final Fortune is like a cheaper chance for glory. It only costs 2 red instead of 3 mana, but it does not give us indestructible. But ironically, it's a bit easier to cast in this deck, and I'll explain a little why when we talk about our ramp package. So this card is gonna make the cut as well. Fury of the Horde is a 7 mana take an extra combat step. However, it can be cast for free if we exile 2 red spells from our hand. So we really want to think about this as a 0 mana extra attack step card. Once again, we can use this if they manage to stop Aura Touch Mage. They managed to block it. Somehow we couldn't get through their blockers, so they chump blocked it. We killed their last blocker. They think that they've managed to avoid disaster, and then we go, okay, I'm going to cast Fury of the Horde and go again. So now let's talk about our ramp removal and draw. We have a lot of ramp cards in this deck, and a lot of it is creatures centric because those are going to be able to contribute to Winota by virtue of being non-human. But we're also going to have a lot of extra ramp spells in here because you want to be able to pay for high X costs in those instant speed spells very early on so we can set up the win very quickly. For ramp, we have Boros Signet, Captain Lannery Storm, Cartographer's Hawk, and Cheering Fanatic. Boring Signet needs no introduction. It's an auto-include. Lannery Storm, whenever we attack, generates a treasure. So once again, it's another card that gets better the more times we attack in a single turn. And it's making mana every time we attack. So that is very useful on paying off activated abilities of cards, or giving us the mana we need to cast a protection spell when somebody tries to interact with us, or to cast things like Final Fortune if we manage to fizzle out. Cartographer's Hawk is a new card, a 2-mana 2/1 flying bird. Whenever it deals combat to a player that has more lands than us, we return it to our hand and we can rampant growth. We can search for a plains and put it into play tapped. It's trying to help address the issues with white ramp, but you know, it's a non-human evasive attacker for the early game, so it's going to be a good include. Similarly, Cheering Fanatic is a 2-mana 2/2 goblin that says whenever it attacks, choose a card name. Spells with a chosen name cost 1 less to cast. This is a throwback to when I was trying to build around Ways of Aggression, the 5-mana retraceable extra attack step. The Cheering Fanatic, of course, every time it attacked, could name Ways of Aggression to make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until it's all the way down to 2 mana. However, I ended up cutting Ways of Aggression because this build is a little more explosive and doesn't want to use a 5-mana extra attack step spell. Cheering Fanatic still is in the cut because we can name things like the Fury of the Horde or Chance for Glory, or we can psych people out by naming things like Trumpet Blast or something that can be blowouty if they choose to block. We're also going to run Commander Sphere, Gold Mirror, Iron Mirror, and Mannequin, so you can see some of these mana dorks, all of which are non-human, help trigger Winota. So early game, they help cast things like Secure the Wastes for extra mana, but then as soon as we're ready to attack, they contribute to Winota as non-human attackers, getting new human attackers into play tapped and attacking. We're also going to run Plague Mirror, Priest of Urbrath, Soul Ring, and Talisman of Conviction. So rounding out our list, we have that Plague Mirror. It's the only infecting card in this list, so it really is just another mirror for tapping for mana, but people are less likely to swing into a Plague Mirror, assuming we won't block in the early game. So it helps ward off incidental damage. Priest of Urbrath I want to call out here because it's a very unique card. It's a human, so of course we can hit it off of Winota and then it adds 3 to our pool. So this is very useful. This can cast Final Fortune from no mana, or it can activate some of the abilities of our creatures, which we'll talk about later. So it's a little bit of a unique utility card. For removal, we have cards like Banisher Priest, Chaos Warp, Fiend Hunter, and Manic Vandal. Banisher Priest and Fiend Hunter exile target creatures when they enter the battlefield. So these are very useful in that evasion category. If they have one blocker standing in the way of the Aura Touch Breath of Fury Mage, we can use these 2 cards to remove that blocker. Otherwise, they're just good at disrupting our opponents. Chaos Warp, a casual staple in red. It helps deal with any type of permanent that's becoming a combo threat. And then Manic Vandal similarly can destroy an artifact when ETBs, so it's a good include. To round out our removal, we have staples like Swords of Plowshares and Wear and Tear, but we also going to run Winds of Abandon. This 2-mana sorcery exiles a creature we don't control, and then for each creature exiled this way, its controller searches for a basic land card, puts it into play tapped. But it overloads for 6, so this is a one-sided board wipe. It destroys, it exiles all blockers from the battlefield. So this is a great setup to our Aura Touch Breath of Fury Mage play. We can just use this to clear the path, and now none of our opponents are able to stop this from happening. So we can just sit there and just kill one, then kill the next, and kill a third, and end the game right then and there. For draw, we're going to use a lot of classic Boros or red rummaging effects, that is discard and draw effects. We're going to use Burning Tree Vandal, Cathartic Reunion, and Keldon Raider, 2 of which are humans, so of course they can be hit off of our Winota. And then we're also going to run Thrill of Possibility, Tormenting Voice, and Wandering Champion. So we round out that rummage list with the additional red instants and sorceries that rummage. But also we have Wandering Champion, which is kind of another pet card of mine. This 2-mana 3/1 human monk says, whenever I deal combat damage to a player, if you control a blue or red permanent, you may rummage. That is, discard a card to draw a card. This one I like because I think most people are going to choose to not block Wandering Champion whenever it's in play. They don't want to risk a mana dork or utility creature to stop what they perceive to be is probably not that powerful of effect, which is rummaging. But we need to use our rummaging effects to the best advantage because we have a lot of redundant jank in this deck. Rummaging is very important when we have a janky build like this at keeping our deck flowing in the correct direction. After that, let's talk about our protection list, the cards that we can use to protect our Winota and our Aura Touched Breath of Fury mage once we're in the process of going infinite. We use cards like Boros Charm, Brave the Elements, and Flawless Maneuver. Boros Charm, the most relevant mode on here. For 2 mana at instant speed, we can give all of our permanents indestructible. It can also give a creature double strike, which could result in a win or deal 4 damage to somebody's face, which is funny. But more importantly, we just want to use this to counter board wipes and or targeted removal against our combo pieces. Similarly, Brave the Elements can do that. It's a 1 mana instant that says choose a color, then white creatures we control gain protection from the chosen color until end of turn. So coincidentally, both Aura Touched Mage and Winota are white creatures, so both of them are affected by Brave the Elements. We can use this to counteract exile effects like Swords to Plowshares. Lastly, Flawless Maneuver is a new card for the new Commander 2020 product, and it is insane. All of this cycle is insane. This 3 mana instant says creatures you control gain indestructible, and you may cast this for free if you control a commander. These cards are insane. They're so blowouty, as I'm calling them. They're just going to make a lot of people absolutely frustrated. Like, why the heck did they print this card? It's so annoying whenever you come across one of them. So of course we're going to run it. Alright, so that wraps up the bulk of the list. I wanted to talk about one thing. When I first designed this list, it was very consistently going off on turn 6, and sometimes as early as turn 5, and I'm talking about winning and killing the pod, which I thought was really great for a Boros EDH deck. A lot of power level. This isn't playtesting, of course. But after I started playtesting more and more, I realized that there was a fundamental flaw that I overlooked in the design that I had laid out. And I had to go back and sprinkle in some changes to my list and create a new category to address it. The biggest problem I had with Winota that I found out just recently is that Winota, while it does put humans into play tapped and attacking, it does not give those creatures haste. That means whenever we trigger Breath of Fury to take an extra combat step, all of the creatures that just came into play through Winota can't attack the new attack step. They're all summoning sick. So I had to go back and add some more hasting humans into the deck list so that they could attack on those extra attack steps. And then also I'm adding in a new category to give creatures haste. In that category, we have things like Anger, Crimson Mage, Emblem of the Warmind, and Hazret's Favor. Anger doesn't need any introduction. Of course, we can discard that to Rummage effects early game, which this deck has a good amount of, to put it in our graveyard to give all of our creatures haste. Crimson Mage is kind of a subpar example of how to deal with this issue. This 2 mana 2/1 human has a red activated ability to give a creature haste until end of turn. So of course this combos well if we hit that. Priest of Urbas adds 3 red to our pool, so Crimson Mage can then give 3 of our creatures haste to get around this oversight. A better example is Emblem of the Warmind, and you know, as a Johnny, I'm excited to be able to use cards as rare and obscure as this. This 2 mana aura says enchant a creature we control, and then creatures we control have haste. So the reason that this makes the cut is, of course, we have Aura Touched Mage and Heliod's Pilgrim designed to go find Breath of Fury. However, in a pinch, we can use them to go get this instead. Maybe we have Breath of Fury in our hand and we hit Aura Touched Mage off of Winota. We can use it to get Emblem so that all of our creatures have haste, and when we start going infinite, we can continually attack with those fresh new bodies. Similarly, Hazret's Favor probably would never see play in EDH deck, so we'll give it a shot here. This 3 mana enchantment says at the beginning of combat on our turn, we may have target creature we control get a +2/+0 and haste until end of turn, and if we do, we must sacrifice that creature at the next end step. So that downside almost makes it not worth it, but when a deck like this is trying to attack as many times in a single turn as possible, and Hazret's Favor triggers on the beginning of each combat on our turn, which means if we take multiple combats, Hazret's Favor triggers multiple times, this makes it worthwhile to give it a shot. We're also going to run Molten Echoes, Odric, Lunarch Marshal, Ogre Battle Driver, and Spontaneous Artist. Molten Echoes is a new card, a 4 mana enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, which we'll probably be choosing human. And then whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under our control, we create a token that's a copy of that creature, and it gains haste. So it's a bit of a nombo with Winota because we're already in the attack step when Winota puts creatures in the battlefield. So Molten Echoes will make copies of them with haste, but they won't be able to attack because we're already in combat. So it's more for the second or third combat step through Breath of Fury that those hasting tokens can then start swinging. But a lot of our humans have ETB triggered effects, so this is kind of like a Panharmonicon in that regard when working with Winota. It makes extra humans enter the battlefield, and their ETB triggers trigger an extra time. Odric Lunarch Marshal is a 4 mana 3/3 legendary human soldier that says at the beginning of each combat, creatures we control gain first strike, flying, death touch, double strike, haste, etc, 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 if we have a creature with one of those abilities. This one's really great if we have a creature with haste, which I've sprinkled a lot of new hasting creatures throughout this deck. Odric will give all of our creatures haste every time we go to combat. And of course, it gets even better with a lot of the other abilities like double strike, menace, and indestructible. Ogre Battle Driver, another pet card of mine. This 4 mana 3/3 Ogre Warrior says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, it gets +2/+0 and gains haste. So this card is excellent to have out and play before we go for our Winota winning turn. It'll just start pumping all of those creatures, increasing our damage output as well as subverting that whole oversight of mine. All of those creatures will have haste when they come into play off of Winota. Spontaneous Artist is an interesting card. That's 4 mana, 3/3 human rogue, enters the battlefield giving us 1 energy, and then we may use a energy to give target creature haste until end of turn. This is the only energy card in the deck, so everyone's gonna be like, what the heck is this? Just think of this card as a 4 mana, 3/3 human that when it enters the battlefield gives target creature haste. So this is kind of like it's a filler card. It helps deal with the issue, and it's a human so that we can hit it, and it's a decently sized human at 3/3. Lastly, we have Zealous Conscripts, the 5 mana, 3/3 hasting human warrior that says when I enter the battlefield, gain control of target permanent until end of turn, untap it, and then it gains haste. So this can be used on our own creatures. You can use on our Bruce Tarl to untap our Bruce Tarl so we can swing if Bruce Tarl has summoning sickness, or we can use it to steal an opponent's creature, which is even funnier. This creature has haste, so of course it helps Odric Lunarch Marshal give all of our creatures haste in the long run. All right, so let's talk about the lands. We're going to use the classic Boros cards, Battlefield Forge, Boros Garrison, and Windscarred Crag. Those will be our duels, helping us fix in a pinch. In addition, we're going to run Command Tower, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic to help with our fixing. Then for ability lands, we're going to run Ghost Quarters, Scavenger Grounds, Myriad Landscape, and Slayer's Stronghold. So Slayer's Stronghold helps us get around that oversight by giving a creature haste and vigilance as well as a +2/+0. Myriad Landscape helps us ramp in the early game so we can get to a bigger, badder, Secure the Wastes or White Sun Zenith. And then lastly, we're going to run 14 mountains and 13 plains. All right, that wraps up this deck list. Like I said before, I felt like this deck was pretty strong, very consistently comboing off on turns 6 and 7. So pretty much in the casual range, I'd say its power level was around the 5 to 6 range, depending on how consistent it was and how much interaction your play group runs. However, with the big oversight adding in the requirement to have haste in addition, it kind of dropped it down to the 4 to 5 range, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong. I haven't done a whole lot of play testing after finding out that oversight, so it has play tested a few times pretty well with those new hasting effects. Ogre Battle Driver does really nicely clean up that problem. But it'll remain to be seen, especially post-quarantine, when we're able to play this against our play groups to see how well Winota stacks up. It's a difficult card to build, but it was definitely a fun challenge from the Johnny point of view. I hope you enjoyed this deck list. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to hear more as they come out. New Ikoria legendaries are always fun to brew with. This is Shannon signing off. Great minds brew alike.